Hi, welcome to the video tutorial on self-governance design pattern. This is a pattern that I have developed and I've started using at work. Uh, it's it's for designing complex systems where things are bound to change. So let's just say you have to start with a project where you have mockups and you have the business logic and everything set, but down the line, things are bound to change. See, your CSS might change, your business logic might change. There might be a third party integration that needed to be done. Anything like that. So this pattern tries to solve such kind of situations. It tries to minimize the amount of rework that you have to do to actually have integrations or changes, any number of integrations or changes. So this pattern is trying to master certain features of software development. The first being sustainability, the second being maintainability, and the third being robustness. So with that given, as you can see from the name of it, self-governance design pattern, it's all about self-governance. So each entity in your software design has to have a uh, certain duty to it. So if let's just take an example of a UI component, if you're talking about UI development. So all it's supposed to do is if it's given a certain value to render, it renders that. And if someone is trying to interact with it, like change that value, it has to change the value in the state or probably somewhere else. It depends on the developer. So that's all it does. It doesn't need to worry about anything else. So if each and every entity inside your software system is only dealing with certain things that it is only supposed to take care of, things are very simple. So tomorrow, if you want to swap out your CSS, your business logic, your actions, your async calls, none of them change. And so when it comes to the ideology behind self-governance, it just has two of them. The first being everything has to be functional. Every entity in your project has to have a certain duty and it has to do that duty with utmost precision and elegance. And the second being the pattern doesn't mandate you to use certain technologies. It's up to you. If you're building any services, it's up to you if you want to use Ruby on Rails or Java services or something else, Python. It's up to you. It's just that it just says that things have to be functional. Functional meaning they only do certain things. If they say that they do something, they have to do only that, and they have to be pure. There has to be no side effects caused. And the second being you can use any of your choice. Any Oh, sorry, that was the second point. Sorry. So that's it for the self-governance design pattern. Uh, so I have broken down this article. This is the introductory article, but there are three other articles alongside it. In these articles, I'll be talking about React and Redux. So UI development using self-governance design pattern. For them, as an example, I use React and Redux, but it's totally up to you. And if you actually end up using this pattern at your workplace or even if you're in your projects and you use some other frameworks like Angular or Vue.js, or if you end up using it in your services or some other place, always the comment section is there for you. Just leave a comment and we'd love to learn more about it. So the ultimate goal of this design pattern is to master chaos in your system. And that's it. And you can always go through the article and the links to other React examples, other tutorials that we're talking about that we'll be going ahead in the video are always present. So if the video is too fast for you, you can always pause and go ahead with the tutorials, and you can always come back to the video. And there are code sandboxes available throughout all the articles, and they are also hosted on Codesandbox, and there are GitHub links also provided for each of those code sandboxes, so you can always go check out the video. Sorry, check out the code. And that's it. So in the next section, we'll be looking at how to build the user registration page that you actually see here. So all you see is a very generic registration page, and any changes that you make here, for let's say the address, it's going to change certain fields. There are certain rules. So now if I, let's just say, put certain address there, etc., you actually see that the zip code, the country, city, and certain things have changed. So all these rules and the UI and the actions and the state management, we'll be talking about everything else. So let's go into part 2 of it, where we'll be looking at the React code and also the example live. In the previous video, we looked at the ideology and the motivation behind self-governance design pattern. In this one, we'll be looking at a code sample. As already mentioned, this is just a code sample that portrays how self-governance design pattern can be used in the context of UI development. But the pattern doesn't dictate that it's only for UI, so it's totally up to the developer. So let's go and look into the code. In the interest of time, the code has already been prepared, but we'll be going through each and every line of it. This is a React code base that has been bootstrapped using Create React App. So all the scripts that you're seeing are by default the ones that are given by the Create React App. We'll be using Fabric components that are provided by Microsoft for the UI purposes, and we'll be using the field change FX calculator for maintaining the rules. Here is Redux and Redux Thunk. Redux Thunk is the Redux middleware that we'll be using, and Redux is a state management tool that I'm going to be using this for this example. Ramda is the functional utility that I'm going to be using. If you heard of Lodash, it's similar to Lodash. I'm used to Ramda, so I've been using it. So index.js here is the entry point into the application. We are wrapping the app view with the provider and the store. The provider is given the store, and this provider is going to inject the Redux state into the app. And Fabric is the theme that all the Fabric components need to render. So we're going to be wrapping Fabric and provider around our app view. So let's look at the app view. So that is going to be index.js here. And all it does is takes the index.js from the views and renders it. Before that, I'm going to be using Simple Grid. This is a very simple CSS grid that has been provided online. If you go to let's search, you can be finding simplegrid.io. This is a very simple, very basic, but very responsive and very helpful utility. This is going to be used for laying out all the elements on the UI as grid elements. So it's a very simple one. If you want to be using this in your project, definitely go ahead with it. There are tutorials as well. Okay, so let's look at the views. The views right now is just the registration page, the UI that we are looking at, and here is the registration page. So if you look at the registration page, it's a very simple component. It's a stateless component which is rendering the whole UI for your page. So every field that you see here, the text field or the drop down field or the phone number field that you see here, are shared components. They are wrappers around the material UI components. Text field is a wrapper around the material UI text field. Drop down field is a wrapper around the material UI. I'm sorry, it's actually Office UI, not material UI. I'm sorry for that. The Office UI drop down field and phone number field that you're seeing here is actually a couple of text fields, the shared text fields that we have developed, and it's a wrapper around them. So let's look at how the code stands out as of now, the UI. So this is how the registration is laid out. So as I was talking about, since we are using simple grid, I'm going to be using row to define a certain row and call for 3 of call for. So each column is like 12 units of size. And when I say 4, like 3 elements of 4, it's going to be dividing, it's like giving 1/3 to each of them. So if you see, I'm getting 1/3 to each of the first name, middle name, and the last name here. And similarly, that's how we have done for others as well. When you actually look at each of those elements, that's actually the fascinating part. So if you see, we didn't give the logic to actually, if someone changes the text field, what should the component do? We didn't tell the component that. All we are doing all we are telling the component is, this is the name that the component has, the first name, and this is the path that where the component can actually find itself inside Redux. That's all we are saying. And if you actually see the structure, it's the same for drop-down field as well. We are just telling this is your name, which is like a unique ID for yourself, and this is the path where you can actually find yourself inside the Redux. If you actually see how Redux is laid out, it's going to give a better understanding. We have fields where each of those fields is like a configuration. It holds the value, it holds whether the field is disabled or not, it holds the configuration that whether the field is required or not. This is totally up to the developer. Since it's a very simple example, I've gone with value, required, and disabled. If this is for a text field, but if you actually look at the drop-down fields like state and country, since right now they don't have any configuration set, but once we start changing them, as you will see in the video, in the future videos, as we start changing them, there will be options injected into the state and country, because whenever the country changes, the options for the state have to change. So it's going to take it up from the configurations. So that is how my Redux is laid out. Sorry. So these are the components. So the UI is pretty simple. So tomorrow, if actually there's a requirement that the CSS is changed, or if let's say they don't want the simple grid, so all you have to do is just change this file, just maintain the same structure of your components and change the file, and that's it, it's done. Even if you actually want to change from Office UI, right now we are using Office UI, if you want to change to Material UI, all you have to do is you have to go to your wrapper, you start using the Material UI components, but what happens is, let's just say there's a configuration called disabled that we are using, which is going to say whether the field is going to be disabled or enabled. But when it comes to Material UI, maybe they are using enabled instead of disabled. So all you have to do is write a mapper that's going to change the value when it comes from Redux before you're putting it into the props of it. So that's it. Things are very simple. Let's look at each of the shared components. So when you look at the text field shared component, it's a very simple component. It's a text field that is taken from the Fabric UI, and I'm giving it a different name because I'm actually using the name text field as a default export. So the original text field is the one that I'm rendering, and name and path are the values that I'm actually sending from the view. The rest, all that you see, they are coming from the map state to props or map dispatch to props. These two are the connections to the Redux that this field is having. So one advantage that the SGTP gives you is, at least in case of UI, is that if one component changes, only that component is going to render. It's not the whole component is going to render. So if you look at the example of your registration page, if let's say your registration page, the initial file of registration page is actually subscribing to the whole fields subtree inside Redux, and then passing it on to each of those children, like each of those fields. If first name changes, the whole JSON is going to change because the reference to the JSON is changed. And now since the object has changed, each and every field has to render. But now since we are not doing that, we are letting each and every field control itself, subscribe itself to itself from Redux. If that field changes, only that field is going to render, and none of them are going to even get a change in their configurations. So that is achieved by taking the path that we are actually giving to the component in the view and using pathOr. This is a function that that Ramda gives you, where you can give the path and the object. So what it does is it uses the path into object. So if you give path as like fields.name, what it does is it gives you state.fields.name. But the good thing about pathOr is, if let's just say fields is undefined, if you don't use pathOr, it's going to fail. Like it's going to say you're trying to access name of undefined. And it's cumbersome to actually start writing if fields of and then fields.name and fields.name, etc., etc. So we use pathOr, where it tries to get value from state of this path. If let's say something goes wrong, something is undefined or null, it actually is going to return you this default value of empty object. So that's it. So now what I'm doing is I'm using the path to actually find my own configuration from the Redux and injecting that into the text field. And once I get the configuration inside the text field, I'm spreading it, and the field constants is actually the file where the constants are saved for the field. The constants can be something like label, placeholder information, or styling or something like that. Things that don't change often, that can be put in constants. So if you actually want to look at the constants, let's just see. Ouch. So this is how it is. It's a default export of an object where you give the name and it's going to give you the label and the placeholder. So I'm spreading on the label and the placeholder, then I'm spreading on the configuration, then I'm actually spreading on the other props. These are just the props that that you probably want to send through the view directly. Sometimes some very specific things like masking or validate on load or stuff that Office UI accepts, you can directly send as part of other props. And I'm giving the name and also an onChanged. This is a modified onChanged. If you remember, we didn't give an onChange functionality. We didn't give an onChange callback in the view. If you actually look at the view registration page, we have never given an onChange here. Actually search for onChange, you won't find it. But actually what happens is, if people actually change, if someone changes this particular text field, we have to update the value of that particular component inside the state. So that's why we are writing our own onChange handler, to which we are giving update field value. Let's talk about this update field value later. Let's just assume that it's just a common, a functionality that is used to update value inside Redux. And this onChange that you're seeing is actually the value that if you want to have very specific things, if you want to change, if we like have a callback, if address changes, you can give an onChange here. You can just give an onChange right here itself, and that's going to be here. And since this is not a required field, we are giving a default value of a dummy function, and you're just calling the same onChange just sending the onChange function here, and it's going to be called only if it's actually defined. So that's it. So onChange is actually a modified onChange handler that's going to call, it's always going to call update field value, and it's going to call onChange if it's actually defined. Uh, this is how your text field is going to render value. It's going to pick up value from the state, and also use update field to update itself. And now let's look at how the update field works. So it's actually a shared, a functionality that you can get from your actions. In my case, as I was talking about, I'm using the the field change fx calculator, but it's a utility that I've built for maintaining rules. It's totally up to you. If you want to use some other rules management tool, it's totally up to you. It's just an example that I'm using the fx calculator. Mm, let's just close this. We don't need this anymore. And let's go back to our text field. So this is the missing piece of the puzzle that we haven't discussed yet. Let's look at that one. Let's go to actions, fields. So this is a Redux thunk where it's going to take the name and the path of the value that we are trying to update, and it's going to take the new value of that field, and all it does is gives all these functions, all these variables and values to the calculator. And the calculator is actually the field change fx calculator that we got from our package. We have imported through our package, and then we are giving it the rules. For now, assume there are certain rules set. So this calculator, all it does is it gives you changes. It's going to give you an array of changes. So if there's a rule set that if someone changes the first name, the last name has to be mandatory. So now the required field, the required configuration of last name has to change inside your Redux, so that all these changes and these calculations are done through the calculator. And once that is done, this update field value action is dispatched, and it's actually called using the reducer. In the reducer, all I'm doing is I'm taking the changes, I'm running through them in a for each. I'm taking the old props from the state, and I'm taking the new props from whatever I got, the updated props, and then I'm spreading both of them and updating the new state and calling it the new state, and I'm returning that new state. The reason I'm actually spreading the old props and then the new props is the calculator that we have talked about can, like, it depends on the developer. It might happen that the developer only wants to change certain fields inside the configuration, or like the whole field or not. So if you actually directly give updated props into the state, certain things might be missed. So we are first spreading all the old props and then spreading the new props. So if there is something overlapping, it's going to take from the updated, like the new props. So this is pretty straightforward, the reducer. So the last piece of the puzzle is actually the calculator, how to write those rules. There is another article that I've published a while ago on how the field change fx calculator works. So let's see that one. So this is the article that I've created a while ago. It's called Maintaining Form Field Interactions and Stuff, How to Make It Easy. If you actually want to know how the rules are written and how the rules, the changes are calculated and how the changes are going to look like, what is the type of them, what is the props and everything, go through this. In this one, I have also provided a REPL where you can actually go try out. You can write your own test cases to it. You can judge it. It's up to you. In the interest of time, I'm actually going ahead with writing the rules, assuming that you already know them. If you're not, just pause the video here, go through this article. It's medium says 2 minutes. I'm gonna say it's 5 minutes. Skim through it. It's gonna give you an ideology of how the rules are written. So in the next part of this series, I'm gonna be talking about how to write those rules, and that's the last piece of the puzzle. That's it. Thank you. In the previous video, we have gone through how the UI is laid out, how the data flow is done, how the actions are done, and how the reducer updates the Redux so the UI is going to re-render whenever something changes. The missing piece of the puzzle that we wanted to talk about in this tutorial is about how to write those rules. As I mentioned in the previous one, uh, we are using the field change effects calculator that I've created a while ago. Uh, Go through the article. It explains you about how to write those rules, how the changes are calculated, and what is the how does the changes look like. Like it's an array of objects, but how does each of those objects looks like? Go through this, and once you're done, resume the video, and we're gonna look at. Okay, let's look at the rules. We have the field rules.js. So it's a very simple, it's an object. In its essence, it's an object where you have name. This is the name that you actually gave to the field in the view. So if you see view registration page, the name is address. So when you're writing the rules here, you're saying that if the value of address changes, this array of changes have to happen. So what I'm saying is, if someone changes the value of address, the value of zip code has to change. The configuration of zip code, I'm sorry, I should have said. Yeah, configuration of zip code has to change inside Redux. So what I'm saying is, someone changes the value of address, the new value of address is actually given to the function called props, which is going to create the props for zip code, the new props. And what I'm saying is, the required configuration of zip code has to change. If the new address is not empty, zip code has to be required. If the new address is actually empty, then it has to be disabled. So this is these are the rules that I'm setting for the zip code. The same goes for city, the same goes for state and country. It's a little different for state because I really don't want to make it editable till I actually have certain value for the country, because the drop down for the state depends on the value that you select for the country. So I'm only going to set whether it's required or not. So if someone changes the address, and if it's not empty, the state has to be required. That's what I'm saying here. And if you actually change the country, these are the configurations that I want to change. If someone changes the value of country, the state has to change. First, its disability has to be changed. Now the new country, if it's actually not empty, then this has to be disabled. Sorry, if it's empty, this has to be disabled. If it's not empty, it will be enabled. And the options have to be changed. This is a very simple functionality where you give the new country, it's going to give you an array of the states for that country. And the same thing happens for the phone number code. The phone number code has to change depending on the new country value. So in our project, what we had a requirement is that the phone number code has to be not editable at every point of time. Its value has to be derived based on the country. So that's what we are getting out of it. So whenever someone changes, the new value of the country is given to the props function, and internally it gives that new value of the country to this particular handler and the utility. It's going to return you the value of it. That's it. These are all the changes that you're seeing. So if you actually look at the example, let's refresh the page. Let's go for the basic one. And the rule is said that the first rule is that if address changes, the value of it changes. If it's not empty, zip code, country, state, and city's configuration has to change. So let's see if that is actually valid. If I put something 346, let's actually look at it. So the address value has been changed from null to 3. Because of that, the zip code has been made enabled, and the value is required true. That's why you see the red asterisk here. The same for city, but the state, the required is changed, The editability has not been changed because country is still empty. The value of country has been changed. Sorry, the disability and required configuration of the country has been changed. And the same goes for phone number code, because right now the country is null, so the code is still empty. Let's commit everything. Let's go for a clean slate again. Now let's select certain thing. If I select United States of America, since the country has changed, now it's not an empty string. The state has changed. The disability of the state has been changed, and the options have changed. Now it actually has Texas and California in it. The value of country has changed, and the phone number code has changed from an empty string to +1, which is actually the country code for US. If I actually change this to India, on the other hand, you'll see that, oh, sorry, yeah, you'll actually see that the options for state has changed. From Texas, California, these are removed. You have Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh, which are actually the states in India, a couple of states in India. The same goes for the value of country and also the phone number code of the country, which is from +1 to +91. So if you actually look at the updates that are happening, highlight updates. If I actually change the value of United States, you see only the country, the state, and the country code have changed, and nothing else have even rendered. Even the values of only these three have changed, the others have not rendered. That's it. If I actually change the value of address, on the other hand, a bunch of them are going to change. Zip code, country, state, city, country code, everything is going to change. So that's it. That's how I would have, at least if I was given the opportunity to develop this project from ground up, this is how I would have built the registration page. The reason being, since every component is actually separated out completely, tomorrow if I actually want to remove Redux and start using, let's say, React context, all I have to do is change the means of actually getting things out of it. So right now, since I know that I'm actually using Redux, I'm giving the path and the name to it. If let's say I'm using React context, the properties that I actually give to the component will be changed, and also the functionality of the component is going to be changed internally, since now it is actually taking things from the Redux. In the future, if you change it, it's going to take things from the context. The same actually goes for the actions. For now, we are using the middleware. If tomorrow you actually the Redux thunk middleware, and if tomorrow you actually don't want to use it, you probably want to use something else, probably a Saga or no middleware at all. All you have to do is just change the actions, because from the component's perspective, all it does is call it as a function. It doesn't care whether it's going to be Redux thunk or Saga or no configuration at all. Sorry, no middleware at all. So on that note, I would actually like to end this video and give you a bonus. So the bonus being, whatever claims I've made till now, I wanted to show you guys in action. So let's look at this particular code sandbox. I've named it SGDP bonus because it's actually a bonus in which we are talking about every aspect that we actually which I actually mentioned in the video. So if I actually change the value, let's see, I'll give my name here. I'll give my name. If I actually toggle the UI, right now you have 4 rows. If I toggle the UI, this is a completely different page. From the code perspective, this is a completely different view, but my state persisted. If I actually want to change the address here, the values of the configurations of 4 fields has changed. If I actually toggle my UI, the configuration still stays with it. Because this is possible because the state, the UI, the actions, the reducers, the rules, everything are separate. All I'm doing is toggling the UI, just like how the UI, the name says it. And there's another bonus to it. Now, since my UI is extremely configurable, I can actually toggle between the components by themselves. This is Microsoft UI. If I want to go to Material UI that Google says, all I have to do is do this. That's it. My UI has changed, but my state is persisted. So if I actually change the value, if I go back to toggling UI, my state is persisted. I can toggle my components at any point of time. I can toggle my UI at any point of time. The values stay. This is the highest benefit, I would say, the best benefit that I would say you get out of self-governance design pattern. And I'm mentioning this again and again. It's because each and every component, each and every entity in your software is actually maintaining itself. This is possible. So tomorrow, if you have a new UX developer and he's interested in actually changing the whole UI for your application, you don't need to rewrite your code. All you have to do is rewrite your CSS and your view components, and your business logic, your actions, your red users, everything is going to stay the same that it used to be. On that note, I would like to end this tutorial. Uh, this is probably going to be a huge tutorial if I club all the 3 videos that we have been going through. It's probably going to be around 30-35 minutes. Uh, if you are a video guy, go through this. If you are a reader, then you already have the articles published on Medium. Once again, thanks for going through this video. Give us a thumbs up and please give us claps on the Medium. Definitely helps. Thank you so much.